So, Berto, let's talk about some random things because I have a whole backlog of stuff I want to talk with you about. What do you say?
Let's do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I am fascinated by the work that I do every single day, which is the same work I've done for years.
So I wanted to talk with you about Tiger King because I did an episode about it, and I wanted to hear your thoughts. So did you like Tiger King?
I did. I kept hearing all these people talk about Tiger King, everyone posting on Facebook, all these memes. I had no idea what it was. I actually thought it was an old show because I saw like the picture and I was like, is this from like the 90s or something? And I finally made time to watch it. I'd say the first half was more compelling than the second half, but yeah, it was quite enjoyable.
So what did you think about it? Do you think Carol Baskin did it?
I don't think she killed her husband, even though I found a lot of contradictions with her, and I don't believe she killed her husband.
Wow, I mean, that's going against like most of the internet, you know.
I do, but I think she's got a personality that I think a lot of people don't like, and so that's not helping her cause. She's also like presented as the antagonist. So psychologically, I think a lot of people are like, yeah, she did it, man. Look at her. She's just, plus, you know, they present her a bit as a hypocrite during part of it. So I think all that lends itself to like, yeah, I think she killed him. But I don't know. I don't think so. I certainly don't think she fed him 2 tigers. I don't believe that for 1 minute.
So, yeah, there's tons of people on the internet that's like, Carol Baskin did it. In fact, I subscribed sort of haphazardly to the subreddit Tiger King on Reddit. And
there's a Tiger King Reddit. Of course there is.
Yeah, there's a subreddit for everything. There's probably a subreddit for Carol Baskin did it, but the 99% of the posts on the Tiger King subreddit is related to Carol Baskin as a guilty person of murder. And I find this to be an interesting study of how humans make decisions about how things happen. And because one, there's no definitive data that proves that she did it.
Right.
It's all circumstantial, and we can't trust a single thing that this quote unquote documentary, which I put in quotes because it doesn't really deserve to be called a documentary. It's a sensationalized kind of reality TV show in and of itself. Yep. And it's heavily edited to I don't know, drum up a lot of things, in particular to make Carol Baskin look like a guilty person.
Right.
And so is it possible that she killed her husband and fed him to tigers? Sure, but it's possible that someone else killed him. It's possible that he disappeared. There's a lot of possibilities. That's the nature of this situation, and that's why she's never been convicted, is because there's a lot of possibilities, and there's no evidence that she did. It's possible that she did, but there's no evidence that she did. So there's circumstantial evidence that she did, but that's not enough. And if there was harder evidence, and if there ever will be, then I guess we'll find out. But certainly from the documentary, we know nothing. And I find it to be a very interesting phenomenon that most people are like, oh, she did it. The other thing is that I find interesting is that everyone's in love with Joe Exotic, even though he clearly is a terrible human being. Now he's a likable person, right? I liked him in a lot of ways, in the same way that I have liked a lot of criminals who did bad things.
Well, it's a little bit like Trump. Like there's this part of him that's almost endearing. It's like, oh, he's such a criminal buffoon. It's just so fun to watch. But if it were a movie, that's cool. But when it transcends into real life, it's like, whoa.
Yeah, I mean, you can like someone in the same way that you could like someone in your family and also recognize that they committed a terrible, terrible crime, of which he did. Now, people are saying, well, Jeff and that other guy entrapped him, but it's just like, you can't entrap me to say what Joe Exotic said. Joe,
I know.
Like no one can trick me into offering someone $3,000 to kill anyone, because That's just not in my nature, and I would never do that. But Joe Exotic sure did. Do you know what I mean? And so, I don't. Now, again, you can like Joe Exotic. You can feel bad for him. I certainly like him and feel bad for him. I also recognize that he's in jail for a very fucking good reason. I mean, think about it, people. If someone was out there hiring someone to kill you or someone you love, would you want everyone in the United States or in the world worshiping that person? You know, you just have to ask yourself that question.
And I mean, let's for a second ignore the potential hiring of someone to assassinate. Like, let's just put that aside as if that's nothing. Everything they showed us of his own footage and constant public statements were extremely violent, misogynistic, and like crazy statements against and acts against her. Like shooting a doll in the head, shooting them, exploding her, saying he would decapitate, like constant things that they showed us that were not hearsay. They were him in his own videos, putting it out for the world to see. Now, I know that that's not the same as hiring a hitman legally and things like that. I get it. But let's not pretend like, oh, what? The guy's innocent. Like, this is not, and that doesn't even count, like, the exploitation of, what I would call is probably minor exploitation, because, like, he would, I think, coerce and seduce younger people with drugs. And that's not to mention all the laws he broke in the process of having, like, this is not a run-of-the-mill, next-door, happy-go-lucky neighbor that we should all feel sorry for.
Yeah, absolutely. And in what world is that not a crime to, like, make constant threats of death publicly to another human being? Like, I don't want to live in a world where that sort of free speech is allowed. And I find that to be a problem.
And where everyone is cheering him on.
I know. And again, if you're one of those people out there, which I'm guessing some of you are, that is now not liking us because we're saying these sorts of things, rewatch the documentary and rewatch the footage and try to see it objectively and not through the lens that the producers are trying to push you in the direction of. There's no evidence that Carol Baskin committed the crime that convinces anyone, particularly the legal system, which is a system you should regard on some level. And there's tons of evidence that demonstrates that Joe Exotic committed a massive crime. Now, again, you could dislike Carol. The other thing that I think is happening is sexism, is that there's a general sexism in our society that has been, sort of has infiltrated all of our minds, regardless of your gender. And you watch this thing, and Carol Baskin comes across as like ultra feminine in this. Yeah. She is just very feminine, and so there's just this general hatred of that. I also think that there's a lot of people who have a lot of transferences against their own mothers, and I think they're reacting to that. Joe Exotic comes across as like your cool older brother, and Carol Baskin comes across as like a withholding mother. There's a certain there's a certain vibe that the producers painted with the footage that they did of her. Just one detail of the manipulation that the producers did was, whenever you're you and I have been interviewed for documentaries before, and you remember when they interview us, they'll say, pause before you answer the question, and then pause after you answer the question, because we want dead space to edit around, so that we don't want crosstalk. We don't want people talking at the same time. So, wait a few beats before you answer the question. Wait a few beats after you answer the question. So that's just a common thing, and I'm quite positive they did that with Carol Baskin. And in the documentary, quote unquote, they keep a lot of those moments in where she'll answer the question, and then there'll just be this pause, this really awkward, pregnant pause
to make it look like she's like, oh, I don't know, maybe I'm not sure about what I just said.
Right. And she often gives kind of a weird looking face because it's a very awkward moment. You know what it's like, to be interviewed. It's a very awkward way to have a conversation, to answer a question and then wait 3 seconds in silence. It's a very weird way to have a conversation. And so they would leave those in, or they would edit in other facial expressions that they probably got from other footage to make it look like she it doesn't really believe in the words that she's saying at times. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I just found that to just be despicable in a certain way. And then when I first reacted to the documentary, quote unquote, on YouTube, I was less sort of I had less disdain for it. But the more I think about it and the more I read other articles of people that I respect, the more I'm just like, those producers are some of the best manipulators on the planet. And we can think of other people who are just as good at manipulating people to like someone who is a criminal.
Wow, that's really interesting because I hadn't actually considered this. The only thing that I had thought of recently is that I saw an interview with her where she was talking about how the way they approached her about the project was completely different than what the project was. And they basically sold her on it from the perspective of like, this is an expose of a lot of these places. And so your role in this will be good because, you know, you'll help us expose. Something along those lines. And I could totally imagine that too, because she'd be like, oh yeah, finally, you know, people get to hear my point of view, blah, blah. Or not finally, because she's got an audience, but I mean more broad, more mainstream, right? And then that turns into a, you know, like very different experience, one that is enjoyable for a viewer, but if you start realizing what you're saying, it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah. Now, I will say that me and my wife were eternally entertained by this documentary. Like every episode, we're like, oh my God, what? I mean, it was some of the most, you know, riveting TV I've ever seen in my life, honestly. But we have to look critically at what we're looking at, and particularly at society's reaction to it. So the other thing that I thought of pretty quickly was that this is what I might call classism porn, where for us middle, upper class people, this is looking down at working class people and just laughing at their lifestyle and their choices. And
hold on. Let me ask you about that, because many of the people that we were laughing the most at are like ridiculous millionaires.
But you can be a millionaire and be low class. Like very, you know, intelligent commentators on class will point out that Trump actually, even though he's extremely rich and privileged, comes across as low class. The way he talks, the sort of things he says, his politics, this kind of thing. And low class meaning that you come from a particular culture and a pocket of society that doesn't have the values of quote unquote high class. High class is not better than low class. It's just a different culture. Middle class is a different culture. Working class is a different culture. Immigrant class is a different culture. And so this documentary shows people who have mullets, who have, you know, lots of the kinds of tattoos that you have in that particular culture. I don't even know if I want to call it low class. Put whatever label of class you want to put to this, but mullet class, you know, let's call it that class. And the producers absolutely knew that. They put Raph, who is a trans man, in a junkyard to interview him the entire documentary. Why would they put him in a did you notice, you know, the person who lost...
Who was the trans man?
The person who lost his arm, his hand?
Oh, I thought that was... Okay, so that was born a man and now a woman?
I don't know, but he identifies as a trans man.
Oh, okay, I did not know that.
Which is another problem with this documentary. They never pointed that out and allowed everyone to misgender this person. But anyway, that... he was in a junkyard. Why the hell was he being interviewed in a fucking junkyard? They had, I think, John, the first husband that we see in the documentary, he is being interviewed without his fucking shirt on the entire documentary. Do you think that was his idea? I doubt it. You know, because all the rest of the time, because for a while I was like, wait, is this guy like Randy on Trailer Park Boys? Do you watch that show?
Yeah.
And because Randy never wears a shirt, but in all the other scenes where, you know, he's just walking around, he's always wearing a shirt. So you just have to wonder what the producers were thinking. The one of the iconic shots that I laughed at the time, but then sort of chastised myself for laughing, that guy who had it kind of comes in later in the series, who had the water vehicle, if you will, the skidoo or whatever.
Yeah, right. And they show him going around the water and stuff like that.
Right. That is absolutely played for laughs. And they went to him and they said, so we're just trying to get this B-roll footage. Go ahead and get on, do you have it? What do you like to do? We're like, oh, well, I have some watercraft. He's like, oh, okay, great. Why don't you get on your watercraft, go out into the lake, and then we'll film you kind of coming back. The producers, as they're filming this, are telling him, oh, this is good footage. This will make you look cool. They absolutely know that middle America, us, are going to laugh our asses off at the way this guy looks because of all the accoutrement that points to low class.
Hey, speak for yourself. I thought that was like a James Bond style scene.
Yeah. And again, I hate to be a party pooper for people because this is one of the most beloved, and I will admit that I laughed and I was having a good time. But at the same time, we just have to look at ourselves and wonder, why is this so entertaining? What about this is so entertaining to us?
I hadn't thought about the class thing because I'm certainly aware and have thought of, we don't want to be making fun of poor people or people because of disabilities or skin color or religion, any of that stuff. But this class thing is interesting because I'm not familiar with that one as much. Thinking of and maybe it's different in Colombia. Maybe it's a different thing. Like I can't remember in Colombia that there would have been such a thing as making fun of the kind of class that some of the rich people are. The only thing that comes to mind is we did used to make fun of gringos, people of the United States, but the usual way we'd make fun of them is, I remember shows where there would be someone from the United States and they'd have this thick accent when they talked in Spanish, and they'd be like, "Hola, ¿cómo estás?" And they would make really cheesy jokes, and they would usually be like big and lumbering and stuff like that. And then we would make fun of that. But I don't remember rich people being made fun of. And I wonder if it's a difference in how, and I don't just mean rich people, but certain kinds of rich people. Whereas you're right, there is a certain kind of class here that is made fun of, even if you have money.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the correct use of the word garish. It's the way that they dress, the way they talk, the way their hair looks, the sort of music they listen to, the decor that they have, the sort of tattoos they have, the fact that they're losing their teeth, the fact that a lot of them are overweight, the fact that they have certain kinds of interests. These are all cues of class. Yeah. And for the refined people of Seattle, for example, which has a lot of upper class and middle class people, they would never be caught dead doing those things. Just to see a man who has lost some of his teeth is one of the most disgraceful things you could ever do in common society in Seattle. To walk around without a front tooth is, it takes you down 50% in terms of your respectability in society, and that's just one of the markers of class. So there's just a ton of examples of that in the show. Now, for many viewers, they might not have had that experience because they don't laugh at people in this class or this culture, or they are of that culture and they don't, they didn't see anything to comment on. But for me, I just, for the majority of people watching, I'll just say for myself, when I was watching it, I was like, oh no, I'm laughing at this for probably a bad reason. Similar to the way you were talking about in Colombia, how they would make fun of gringos with their bad accents. Borat is making fun of a foreigner with a bad accent, right? Making fun of someone that doesn't speak English all that well and is also, has a different cultural understanding of certain ideas. Now, to want Jews to die, which is one of Borat's common things, I think that's up for grabs to laugh at. But other kinds of things of that he comes from a really poor village where his wife has to work the fields a lot or something. Somehow that's supposed to be really funny and Now, again, I'm right there laughing. Borat's one of my favorite movies, but then I have to look at myself and go like, wait, why am I laughing so hard at this? And in 50 years, when we have a greater understanding of these phenomena, am I going to frown at these kinds of things? Because we can certainly look back at depictions of things. Just to give you an example, 50 years ago, Breakfast at Tiffany's has Andy Rooney acting like a Japanese person.
That's
in this
right.
Anyone out there who doesn't know what I'm talking about, just Google Breakfast at Tiffany's Japanese guy, and you will see. And this was a blockbuster movie. This wasn't some secondary. This was you've probably even heard of this movie, even though you might have never seen it. Breakfast at Tiffany's, and at the time, this was absolutely accepted. No one blinked an eye at it, except for Asian people, of course.
Well, they laughed. They loved it.
Yeah, they thought it was hilarious. Look at that Asian. Everyone knew Andy Rooney wasn't Japanese because he was one of the most famous actors that had ever lived, particularly back then.
Yeah.
And it was hilarious. And now all those same people who laughed would not laugh at that because of their understanding today.
Yeah.
And similar in 50 years, I wonder if we would look at this differently and be like, I can't believe people thought that was funny. How it's clear that documentary is making fun of a particular class of people.
So a couple of thoughts, though. One of them is, by the way, I had never seen I actually still never seen Breakfast at Tiffany's. But the first time I came across that was watching the movie Dragon, the Bruce Lee story. Do you remember the scene where he's at the movies watching Breakfast at Tiffany's?
No.
And it's Jason Lee, and he's there with his girlfriend. I forget her name.
Okay.
And then he's watching Breakfast at Tiffany's, and that scene comes on, and he sees everyone around him laughing their heads off. And he's just like, why is this funny? And I remember watching that, being like, oh my gosh. And I thought that the scene they were showing was somehow like, I don't know.
Enhanced or something.
Enhanced. Yeah, like I couldn't believe. And I asked someone, whoever I was watching with, I was like, that's not real, right? And like, yeah, that was Breakfast at Tiffany. I'm like, what? That was crazy. So I totally get that. I do think there is one aspect of Borat, which I still think the fact that he was from a specific place of the world is problematic. And there are other things definitely problematic. But one of the aspects is that he was, what adds a lot of humor to that is that he would come up to people, and instead of the people being horrified by the things he's saying, they would join in on it. And that was some of the things we would laugh at in sort of a horrified way, like, oh my gosh, there's people living in our country that would agree with this. And that was pretty crazy. I felt a little bit like that during this because, well, and maybe I'm being naive, but some of the things I was quote unquote laughing the most at were things that are absolutely not okay. Like, for example, the guy getting all the young runaways to form a harem, or the fact that they would basically blow up.
Which Joe Exotic did too,
for males, yeah. Like, and the fact that they would, basically, again, this is not really funny at all in reality now that I think about it, but the worker loses an arm and they're back to work like a day later. But I was sitting there like, oh my gosh, what? Like, it's entertaining / funny in many cases. But yeah, I'm sure that there is some aspect of like, oh my gosh, that guy looks so ridiculous on that Ski-Doo, or what is he wearing? Or why do they have those tattoos there? Or why is he missing all his teeth? Now, the teeth thing is funny because that seems to be meth related, right?
Right.
Yeah. Anyways, but yeah, it's interesting.
Which incidentally is another class drug, right? Meth is associated with a particular class. Anyway, just a final note before we go to break about Doc Antle and his harem. And people are, is it a cult? Again, we don't have enough data. We have one person, the young woman who talked about her experience. And certainly it raises some eyebrows as to Doc Antle's techniques, so to speak, to wrangle free labor, essentially. But it's also something that it sounds like she could have walked away at any time, that she liked the job because she was able to work with the tigers. That was a big dream of hers. And was she too young to consent to the kinds of things that she was subjected to? Maybe, you know, and but we can't. There's just not enough data in that documentary that indicts Doc Antle, particularly with regards to the other women that we see depicted. You know, there's plenty of other women. On the surface, the facts on the surface we have, and I looked up other, because they make it look like Doc Antle has like 10 women with him.
Yeah.
But from reports, it's something closer to like 3 or 4, and some of the other women just happen to work there. And there's nothing wrong with a polyamorous relationship. There's nothing wrong with it happens all the time, particularly here in Seattle. There will be 1 man and 5 women, or there'll be 1 woman and 5 men, or there'll be 4 men and 3 women that are in a polycule, as they call it. Totally ethical, as long as everyone's consenting and no one feels trapped and everyone feels safe, and everything's on the up and up. It's consensual. Then what a wonderful arrangement for people to have. It's totally up to them. They can do that for sure. So we don't know. Now, for that one woman, we could. The thing that I said in my reaction video that I did a couple weeks ago was that we need to help people like her understand these situations so that they go into it with an open mind, so that they can protect themselves. Because it sounds like part of her kind of regretted some of the things that she did or that she was subjected to, that she could have easily protected herself from if she knew the signs and had the support and had the ability to push back. Because there was no allegations that Doc Antle raped her or forced her to do anything, right? I mean, I don't remember everything that she said. But
yeah, I don't remember any of that. But I mean, couldn't you interview, and I know this is a worst extreme, but maybe, I guess, but couldn't you interview 90% of the people or more in David Koresh's camp or something and have them say, no, I'm here. Not only am I here voluntarily, like I would die if I was, like stuff like that, or,
Well, so that brings up another question. There's a difference between a abusive, high control relationship like the NXIVM cult that we talked about last year, which I can't remember the guy's name, but you remember I can't remember her name, but they would force the women.
Smallville.
Yeah, the woman from Smallville. They would force the women to do bad things, like if I'm remembering right, and they would say, "We will, post this on Twitter if you talk bad about us or you leave the cult." That kind of stuff. Or they would literally hold women down and make them do sexual things.
Well,
and then
yeah.
But
the woman claimed that similar stuff in the documentary. Like the one that is no longer there said, they would try to, they had, the problem is that they have so much dirt on you or something like that. I can't remember how she phrased it, but.
Oh, she did?
She said something like that, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, then that's data in that camp for sure. I mean, if it was implied that, look, if you leave or if you talk bad about us, we're going to release all this stuff. Yeah, I kind of remember that. Something about like different potentially illegal animal practices.
Oh, right. That's what it was about.
Yeah. So then that's criminal, and that's absolutely something that even if you had open eyes, you can't protect yourself from that. But my larger point here is that, as we always talk about, the kinds of things we teach kids in elementary school and high school are fine, but they miss so many important things that we need to teach people, critical thinking being one, but also the idea that one can be exploited by charismatic people who attract you with certain things like tigers and fame and a community, and then they'll use that to exploit you and will ultimately be a bad idea for you. What class touches on that? I'm guessing that 1 out of a million teachers has even talked about that with their students,
If that. Well, although I did take the Cult Defense 101. You didn't have that class?
Yeah. So let's take a break, and when we get back, let's talk about the movie Midsommar, because I finally watched it. What do you say?
Oh, yes. Let's do it.
So, Berto, if the Tiger King were here trying to convince everyone to become a patron of the podcast, what would he sound like?
And the thing is, like, look, I got all these tigers, and people are always telling me that, like, like I am mistreating them or whatever. They don't know. I have the most tigers anywhere, and like not only that, but I'm gonna run for president. And I want you to understand, like, if you give your support to me by becoming a Patreon, like, I'm going to have a tiger delivered to your door every morning. Like a baby tiger, you can pet it, you can sell it, you can grow your own baby tigers and send them back to me so I can send them back to your doorstep every morning. And then, like, there'll be one pot in every kitchen and one baby tiger in every door. That's my, like, Joe Tiger promise.
All right, so let's talk about Midsommar, the movie. It came out a long time ago, and
sorry. One side note. From the very first song of Joe's that they showed, I'm like, that's not his voice. Right. There's no way on earth that's his voice.
Right.
And sure enough, it came out that it's not his voice.
So that's another thing about the producers. Why didn't they fucking mention that?
Right.
I mean, that is one of the biggest lies that they committed, and it's so obvious, and it would have taken 5 seconds to explain it, or even just a graphic. By the way, this isn't him singing.
Yeah.
And why didn't they do that? Well, because I'm quite positive that as they were editing, because they had all this footage, as they were editing this thing together, they're like, well, Joe Exotic is clearly a bad person, but that's not an interesting documentary. What we want is for people to we want people to ride the line, you know?
Anti-hero.
Yeah, and so I think they either knew what they were doing by making us hate Carol Baskin and making us love Joe Exotic, or they had the pendulum swing too far. Like they were worried that we as an audience were going to stop watching because we were like, well, this is just a documentary about a scumbag. And they were like, well, we have to make him look likable. We have to accentuate the good side of him. And one of the things that they did was they showed these videos, which, you know, on one level are sort of ridiculous, but on another level are, you know, it makes him look like a competent person. Like, wow, like, because I didn't, the voice wasn't what threw me off about it. It was because you and I are songwriters, it was by the third song that they showed, because you know, because some people's singing voice sound different than their talking voice, you know, like
yeah, but not that different, but sure.
You know, like I have a baritone talking voice, but I have a tenor singing voice, you know.
But you don't talk like this and then sing like this.
But you know, sometimes the point is that I wasn't quite sure, and I figured, well, they would tell us if it wasn't really him. But then when I heard the third song, and I was like, all three of those songs are pretty well-written songs, even though they're not songs I would listen to, and they're really different. Because if you're sort of a mediocre songwriter, your songs tend to all sound the same. And I was like, wow, you know, each one of those songs is like pretty distinct. And I thought, there's no way that he wrote those songs. So I thought, well, maybe he just sang them, you know? And then I Googled it, and instantly I found out that actually it's fellow Washingtonians that actually wrote those songs. And they thought that they were going to be credited, by the way. And that's just another...
Wait, fellow Washingtonians as in multiple different people from the state of Washington?
Yeah.
Or that's the name of their band?
Yeah, no, two guys from Washington State. One of them actually died recently.
Oh.
But they wrote and recorded those songs. Joe Exotic paid them, I can't remember, like tens of thousands of dollars to write, you know, he said, write a song about me and a tiger, you know what I mean, that kind of thing. And then he recorded his own videos, unbeknownst to these songwriters, I think. And because they were going to be featured in his documentary, you know, or his reality TV show. Remember how they were making?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Joe TV or whatever it was.
Right. So he got them to do all this work for, you know, a lower rate because they were like, oh my God, I'm going to have these songs featured in a reality TV show. This is going to be amazing. What he didn't know is that Joe Exotic was going to take complete credit for all of it as well.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Anyway, so Midsommar. This is the follow-up movie to Hereditary by Ari Aster. And when it came out, everyone was like, oh my God, you got to see this movie. And people made it sound, including you, they made it sound interesting enough to watch, because I didn't really like Hereditary because I'm not really into horror. And although I know Hereditary is on the sort of non-horror side of horror, it still came across as horror. Like, for example,
oh yeah,
the scene that I always think about is to exemplify this is the son is in bed and he's reading or listening to music or something, and then all of a sudden these hands come up from behind the banister and start to strangle him, and the music is very horror inducing and all that kind of stuff, and then the mom bursts in the room and the hands disappear, and we're like, wait, was the mom, it's very, very horror trope, and so I was like, do I see Midsommar? Because people were like, well, it's not really that horror-like, but it's definitely not horror in some ways.
I mean, it's horrific.
Yeah. But anyway, Berto, 1 to 10, what's your score for Midsommar?
All right. I believe I gave Hereditary like a 9 or something.
Okay.
But I would say Midsommar, I would give it a 7.5.
Interesting. I think I gave it a 7 because, and I will say that it didn't have an element of horror except the end, kind of.
Yeah.
But I didn't find this movie, because I posted on Facebook, on our Psychology in Seattle Facebook page, I was like, oh, I finally watched Midsommar. Wow. And someone commented, Kirk, I thought you hated horror movies. And I didn't take this movie as horror at all. It's psychological thriller through and through. Now, there are certainly gory scenes, like now, by the way, spoiler alert, this movie does not lend itself to being spoiled. So if you really want to watch it, go watch it, come back. Like when the old people jump off of the cliff and, one of them lands on her face, and then the other guy has to have his face bashed in by a giant hammer.
Because he didn't quite die all the way.
Right. That was extremely gratuitous. I mean, there's so many other ways that could have been shot without showing that level of specificity to the way a face looks after the brain has been smashed out of it. You know what I mean?
It reminded me of Irreversible, because at the beginning of Irreversible, I had the same experience. Like, I didn't need to see that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a certain notion that I think it plays upon, which is that our heads are, I don't know, like these fixed spheres that can't be crushed. Like when someone gets a bullet in the head, the shape of the skull is still sustained, but in Irreversible and Midsommar, you clearly see that with a hard enough force, like a deformation can occur. And I will say that I actually witnessed a car accident in my life and saw a guy's head get crushed in that.
No.
Yeah, and without going into too much detail, basically saw a scene like that old guy getting his head bashed in.
Oh my God. Were you traumatized by this?
Not in terms of a traumatic reaction. I mean, it was very memorable, but I personally didn't feel terror in the moment. A part of me was just sort of, it was a heightened experience, I'll say that. But yeah, it happened right in front of me. A car rolled down the highway, and a guy came out of the skylight and was being crushed as the
oh my God,
SUV was rolling and bouncing right down the highway, and I was one of the first people to come, if not the first person to come upon him laying in the middle of the road to see if he was alive. And I instantly realized the man was not alive. It was pretty awful. And then another.
Oh, I can't even imagine that.
Yeah, the whole scene was pretty interesting and terrible and tragic. Young people. We were all so Apple Cup, between the Huskies and the Cougars. So in Washington State, we have two main state schools, University of Washington and Washington State University, and they have a big football game, American football game, in the fall, and it rotates between being played at the different universities. And so we all went out to Pullman to watch it. And the next day, as we were all, there's a lot of people streaming back to Seattle after the game, and it happened there. Anyway,
I remember you telling me this now that I think about it. You had mentioned this before, but what a horrific thing.
Yeah. Now, I will say that Florence Pugh is amazing. I saw her for the first time in Little Women. Have you seen that movie yet?
Not yet.
Yeah.
You did sell me on it, though. I want to watch it.
Yeah, Florence Pugh, when I saw Little Women, was a runaway star of the show. I was halfway through the movie. I think I turned to my wife and I was just like, man, whoever is playing Amy is just an amazing actress. She's just incredible. And then I heard that she was in Midsommar as well, and she totally carries this movie.
Yeah.
She's just
Totally.
amazing. Yeah. I gave it 7 out of 10 because now it's hard to end a movie because the ending was just like, okay, this is going a little far, but at the same time, it's like, how do you end something like this exactly? And I thought that overall, there's so many ways this movie could have been cheesed out. And one of the ways that a lot of writers will do that actually, when we watched, not Witch, but the follow-up to, the Lighthouse movie. Like
Literally The Lighthouse?
Yeah, The Lighthouse. Remember the Lighthouse?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the follow-up to Witch, which is a similar kind of genre, if you will.
I forgot that. Right. That was the same guy from Witch.
Yeah. So what The Lighthouse did that really bothered me was it clearly brought in supernatural elements. We literally saw a mermaid. There was things where it's like, oh, clearly something supernatural is at play here. Whereas in Midsommar, they could have easily slipped into supernatural things are afoot, where
That's right.
someone casts a spell and something happens. All the weird perceptual things can be explained through hallucinogens that they were regularly taking, right?
Yeah.
And they were done in a way that was subtle enough to actually be believable, right? It wasn't like they were completely hallucinating things. They were things felt a certain way, and it changed their perception in a way that I think a lot of people who take hallucinogens might be able to relate to. So I really liked that choice. That was because the amazing thing about this movie to me, and I'll throw to you here in a second, is this story could have happened in real life. That's what's so amazing about this movie, is that it's a fantastical, riveting, jaw-dropping, amazing scene story that feels fantastical. But then I thought about it afterwards and I was like, every single thing that happened in that movie could have actually happened. There's one thing that probably could not have happened, and that is that they had that one guy strung up like a marionette, and and his lungs were outside his body, and they seemed to be breathing still, as if he was still able to breathe, which I guess is possible physiologically, but not likely given blood loss and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? So that was the one thing that I wish they didn't have. They didn't need that in the scene to make it effective. Or maybe they hallucinated, because the guy runs in there and he's already kind of drugged up. So maybe he hallucinated.
That's true.
But anyway, the rest of it is all possible that it could have happened. Cults exist, and weird old religions exist. Ritualistic suicide exists. Hallucinogens exist. Murder exists. All these things could have absolutely happened, which I found to be just a masterful feat of writing and directing and acting, because, like I said, the movie just seems so fantastical,
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that was why I enjoyed it so much, is because I didn't know what to expect, but I did know that as soon as the movie started, I already felt disoriented. I mean, not as soon, but as soon as they got they were traveling by foot towards their destination. So the intro where all the friends are still in the U.S. and they're talking about the trip or whatever, or not the U.S. Where were they coming from? Wherever they were coming from.
Yeah.
But once they actually got to the hills and they were walking and towards their destination, I started to feel disoriented because they did this really good job of like, oh man, there is no night. Like this is all we're gonna get to see, and it adds this bizarre sense of foreboding. That coupled with the fact that they had that sort of free-spirited, like, no, it's good, it's all good, you know. I didn't really know how far they were going to take it. I actually assumed they were going to go sort of a more witch supernatural thing, but I was happy that they didn't. I did sort of wish, and maybe only in retrospect, but I wished that they had somehow made the cult less obviously evil. You know, and I mean, I guess you could say, well, I don't know, were they evil? They were just following their practices. But they were very deceptive, and they clearly trapped them there without their knowledge. It's not like they explained what was going to happen.
Yeah, you know? Especially the first couple murders that they did, the guy who wanted to leave, the English guy, the British guy.
Yeah.
It sounds like they just killed him right then and there, and then strung him up like a marionette. So
it's almost like there was this opportunity they had, and I don't know if it's the same movie. Maybe it's not as enjoyable, but because some of the things that the cult was doing bring up interesting questions, like the what do they call it, the senilicide or whatever, when they were getting rid of the oldest people by ballot, and you know, you could see the movie maybe even attempting to make a justifiable case, like, well, I don't know, what do you do with older people? What if you don't have to wait till you get all rickety and the whole society has to take care of you? What if you go out with a bang? Blah blah blah. Now I could imagine probably a million better ways to go out than throwing yourself and risking still being alive. But that aside, so that was the only thing. Is I kind of wished that maybe they had pulled back a little bit on the obviousness of the evil. The only other thing I guess would be that plot wise, if you step back and you describe what the movie is about, there's actually a lot less plot here than it would seem, right? It's just like these kids go on a trip. One of them is a member of a cult, and it turns out that the cult does some really weird practices, including killing people, and pretty much most of the kids die except for this one. You know, like, but there's not a lot more plot to it, and I felt like, I don't know, I was missing a little bit of plot, but.
No, I liked it. The only plot that I think you could have added, now that because you kind of touched on this a little bit, was made it more justifiable that they killed those initial people. Like, say the guy who, the first guy they killed, the couple from Britain that they killed.
Yeah.
If they were like, I'm calling the cops on you guys.
Yeah.
You know, if that guy, if they had sort of inserted that element. And then they might if they had like a little conversation between the elders of just like, our way of life is being threatened here. You know what's going to happen if he goes to the cops. We all know that, you know, the beauty that we have, you know, some kind of altruistic motivation, rather than what seemed to be a quite evil motivation of they like to sacrifice human beings who don't want to be sacrificed. I mean, the two guys who sacrificed themselves in the end from the cult, right? The two guys who actually volunteer to enter the burning, you know, pyramid. Okay, you know, they made that choice. That's their choice. But for the rest of them, the guy who peed on the ceremonial log, which I found, that was another detail that kind of bugged me, because they made it seem like they had put ashes of the ancestors around that tree for a long time, because they're a small group of people. They can't have that many people dying, right? And they made it look like the ashes were still there, as if rain never happens, you know, and as if that log never decomposes or something. It's another sort of supernatural element. But anyway. But yeah,
and just FYI for next time, just put a little fence around it or something.
But I wasn't really evaluating it on that level. I was just so impressed. So the way I watch movies nowadays, I think you know this because I've told you, is I will watch them in pieces. So I watch, like if I'm eating lunch, I'll sit down and I'll be like, okay, I'll watch like half an hour of whatever movie I'm watching. Like I started watching The Good Boys again, which I highly recommend, by the way. It came out last year, I think, and it's about 3 middle school boys, and it's a pretty funny movie, and the first half an hour is very delightful and very relatable, by the way. But anyway, so I started watching that last night, and I watched a little bit of it today, and I'll probably watch the movie over the span of a few days, and I'll finish it. Well, Midsommar, I sat down to watch it, and I thought, okay, I'll watch half hour here. I watched the entire thing in one sitting because it was so riveting. So let me start from the beginning of the movie. The first 20 minutes is some of the best writing, acting, directing I've ever seen in any movie. When I think they went a little over the top with the suicide depiction with the hose in the sister's mouth with the duct tape all around it.
Oh, I totally forgot about this.
Yeah, and her eyes.
Right, that's how it starts.
Her eyes are all akimbo and everything. It's like you didn't need to have that. That was kind of horror-y to me. There's a different way to depict that would look more realistic. But overall, the first 20 minutes or so of the lead character Danny, played by Florence Pugh, and her insecurity and the way the relationship with Jack Rayner is playing out, and how it looks like he wants to leave, and then her family dies, and he's like, oh shit, well I can't leave her now.
Yeah.
And he does his best, but he's also not really into it, and she really wants him because of course you want to be with your boyfriend, and you really need your boyfriend through a time like that. And the way that they navigated that whole story, the first 20, 30 minutes, I thought was just unique, masterful. I really felt for both Danny and Christian. I felt for even the sort of douchebag friends. They're in their 20s and they're just like, we're going to Sweden, this is going to be awesome. And then you're not inviting your bummer of a girlfriend who you want to break up with, right? You're not bringing her, right? And just the way that whole thing, and then she walks in and they're like, yeah, we want you to come, sure. It's go ahead.
And there's details, right? Because like the cult member is the one that actually spills the beans, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And you don't really, and again, totally masterful. Another writer-director would spill the beans on his motivation early, where they would have ominous music. Because in the beginning, because I didn't know where this was headed, when they have the Swedish guy, the guy in the cult, is talking to Danny, you're like, oh, finally, Danny has someone who really cares about her. And he's really, compassionately talking with her and listening to her, and eye contact, and what a breath of fresh air. I like this guy. And then when
why doesn't she go out with this guy?
Yeah, and then they go to Sweden and they meet up with some of these other cult members, and you're like, wow, these cult members are really cool. And you don't even really think of them as cult members at this point. You just think it's like some sort of fancy dress-up family reunion of some kind, right?
Yeah.
And the style of the movie, so I'm Swedish, and it's one of my, so I'm half Japanese, so I have a big Japanese sort of element in my bones and how I identify. But the other major identification I have is my Swedish line, although I'm not massively Swedish, but it's enough of a line in my mom's lineage that it was passed down to me. And so, in fact, there were times in my life when I just sort of truncated my white side and said I was Swedish, even though that's, being too simplistic. And I would say I'm half Swedish, half Japanese. And so, and I haven't seen that many depictions of like Swedish folk culture, of which this is a riff on, and all the folk art and the folk, ceremonies. And, I have no idea how it's similar to when I watch certain Asian things and like Studio Ghibli stuff, like Spirited Away, for example. Spirited Away, the Japanese anime, is a riff on Japanese folk beliefs. How there are magical spirits around, and how some are evil and some are good, and the river has a spirit and the fox has a spirit, and all these kinds of beliefs from Shintoism, which are incorporated into this beautiful depiction, but it's not the exact representation of the culture. Midsommar, if I'm interpreting it right, is a riff on Swedish folk culture. They took actual Swedish folk culture and kind of expanded it into this this specific representation. The way the art looks, the way the homes look, the way the flowers are depicted, the way the maypole and the dresses that they would wear, and the belief system is like an echo of that. And as I was watching it, and I don't believe in this kind of thing, but it felt this way to me of the energy of my ancestors were resonating in my bones as I was watching this thing, in the same way that when I watch Spirited Away, I feel something resonating in me. Do you ever have that with, like, when you watch Spanish conquistadors just raping and pillaging in South America? Do you feel something in your bones?
I feel so alive. Oh my gosh. I will say that when the first time I watched the movie The Mission with Robert De Niro, I felt incredible grief and sadness. So it's sort of like a mixed bag. But I felt like that mix of, like...
Well, at the time when you watched that movie, you didn't realize you were part conquistador, right?
I knew that there was... I knew I was mixed. I didn't know how much of a mix I was. I actually assumed I was more native than... But I certainly knew... I mean, anyone that didn't look completely native had to have been, impregnated by some Spaniard.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, but the flip side is, I actually don't. I don't feel... That is really odd. It's interesting you bring that up, because I think about, like, if I see some native artwork, like some of in that gold museum, for example, I don't feel anything.
Well, what if you tried to feel it? Because that could be like your 25th great-grandfather.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. I've never done that exercise. It hasn't happened automatically, but maybe if I try to channel it. Same thing on the Spanish side. What I have done recently, though, is every now and then I'll watch these chef shows or videos on YouTube where they show amazing cooking from around the world. And whenever I see the Spanish ones, I sit there and I'm like, okay, this food, like these kinds of meals, these things would have been eaten by my ancestors a lot, And I try to think about that too, but I don't know. It hasn't come natural to me. I'm going to see if I can do a little experiment and channel it.
Yeah, I think I'm just particularly focused on that as a person that's very interested in ancestry. And so, like, when I went to Japan, I tried to frequently imagine my ancestors walking in those places and breathing that air and seeing that landscape. And it felt more present for me. You know what I mean? Even though, so anyway, but yeah, getting back to Midsommar, what else can we say about it here?
I mean, I had a couple of experiences also while I was watching it. One is visually, it was really awesome. There are so many scenes where I'm like, man, they did such a good cinematography / added effects without it feeling at all like there's any effects or whatever. And it was just mesmerizing. And that coupled with the fact that it was constant daytime, it felt overwhelming. I do remember being in the theater and feeling like, man, I don't know how much more I can take of this, but like in a good way, like it felt oppressive. Like, wow, it's like, when is night coming? And there's more stuff happening on the screen, and I could feel the madness of the characters almost. And I think it was all due to both the audio and the visuals. So that was really interesting for me.
One thing I heard from, I can't remember where I heard this, but someone was saying, as a woman, she was watching this, and at the climax, when Danny points to her boyfriend as someone to be sacrificed, as sort of this buildup of her frustration and hurt because of his emotional distance and then his having sex with someone else.
Yeah.
She gets back at him, so to speak, by naming him as a sacrificial lamb to be killed. This woman was saying, as she was watching the movie, that she felt like this movie made her feel female empowerment in a really good way.
Whoa.
Right?
That's weird.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think about that?
That's weird. That'd be like, oh my gosh, I wouldn't even want to go there. It'd be like, yeah, I watched American Psycho and man, I just felt like hooray for the boys.
Yeah, exactly. Now, but here's the thing. I didn't have a chance to talk more in depth. Female people get so few moments of empowerment in movies that I could see a movie like this. Like, I one time watched a movie where, I can't remember what movie it was. Oh, it was The Girl on the Train, I think it is. And do you remember that movie?
Wait, which one was that one? I'm sure I saw it.
It's based on a book. You might not have seen it. But anyway, at the end of the movie, if I remember right, spoiler alert, the woman ends up getting back at the man and stabs him or something like that because he cheated on her. I can't remember. It was something like that. But it wasn't necessarily, it was a gruesome scene, and it wasn't played for female empowerment, let's just put it that way. And I was watching it with Stacy at the Cinnabar.
Oh, I did see this. I did see this.
And they serve booze during the movie, so there are some drunk women behind us who had gone to the movie as a group. And one of the women but shouted in the middle of this gruesome scene, "You go, girl!" And then and then there was all this laughter from women, and I was appalled because it was a very gruesome moment between two human beings where someone was being victimized in a way physically, and I thought, wow. But then again, when you put it in context about how few moments women get to be heroes physically or with tremendous power in movies, that a movie like Midsommar is just like, finally a woman, because usually in a movie like this, the woman dies or something happens to her, or is victimized. Whereas in this movie, she's held up as the queen and the May Queen, and she's celebrated and she's given all this power, and she finally has acceptance in this cult. And so that's one of the through lines of this movie that I find to be very fascinating, that effective writing where we're given this constant sense that she's sort of this underdog, right? She loses her family. She has a boyfriend who doesn't really want to be with her. None of the guys want her to tag along. No one's really there to listen to her. Plus, she's having a really hard time talking about her grief, which they depicted well, I thought. Because the boyfriend at some point is like, talk about it. And she's like, no, I'm not going to talk about it because it's just too much for her, right? And so the story that you could say, it's about a woman who starts off in a very bad place, and she's trying really hard to build a life and to build relationships, and things aren't going well for her. And then in the end, she ends up finding her people and finding her power, finding her home, if you will. And right? I mean, you could say that's the through line of the story, right?
She really does. I mean, you do have that sense like, okay, she's come home to something she didn't even know she could come home to.
Right. And you could see that at least symbolically. Now, I'm sure women who feel female empowerment from this movie would agree that it's not okay to murder. But at the same time, it's like philosophically or symbolically or metaphysically, by watching this movie, it symbolizes a liberation of this woman free from a loveless relationship, free from a society that doesn't really want to hear her talk about her grief. And she's subsumed within a society that really understands her and is there for her and celebrates her and is simple. The way she wins the May Queen is she, while drugged, just manages to stay dancing longer than the other girls. It's a very childish return to the simple things in life. that allows her to be liberated, you know, all these complicated city folk with their dissertations. And we're just out here in the flowers enjoying ourselves. You could see this from her point of view of being definitely a step up.
Yeah, that I could see that. So as a metaphor, I think it works. I guess it is a little worrisome that well, because I was thinking as you were talking that a lot of horror movies actually have the female as the heroine. And I think Alien copied that model, and it seems to work well. I wonder if part of it is a lot of the horror movies that are based on a monster or a serial killer definitely have this like male threat as part of the antagonist. Even Alien, I mean, it's a freaking creature that has a penis that comes out of a penis, basically. You know, it's like really, really scary. And I wonder if that lends itself well to, like, you know, we might have even in our bones, in our minds genetically from millions of years of like, oh shoot, that other tribe is coming. Oh man, they're gonna kill most of us men and certainly gonna rape the women. And oh man, that sucks. And like that might be so embedded in our fears that we see a horror movie and you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. The big male bad guy is coming and he pretty much kills all the males, most of the other women, and then he's trying to get this one too, but she perseveres. Yay.
Right. Women, at least, it's hard to know historically because we didn't live back then, but certainly today, and certainly when horror movies became popular in the 60s, 70s, 80s, women were the ultimate underdog. They have less power, they're perceived and often have less muscle mass, so they are the perfect person to root for because they're the most vulnerable. And when they rise above it, then it's even more evidence of their perseverance and courage and strength and, you know, all that kind of stuff.
I think how horrible it is that it's not like the saying is, oh, you know, the Vikings or whoever, they're going to pillage and plunder, right? No, they're going to rape, pillage, and plunder.
Yeah,
like it's built into the saying.
It's not just the Vikings.
No, I know. I'm saying like as an example of Vikings.
Don't diss on my ancestors.
It's only the Vikings, dude.
I mean, in World War II, when the Germans rolled over Poland, and then when the Soviets rolled over Poland, rape and all sorts of atrocities occurred regularly.
Yeah,
I'm guessing American troops raped and pillaged as they went across France and Germany as well. Hopefully to a lesser extent, but I'm guessing it happened. So yeah, it's just one of those things, I suppose. It makes you wonder about the likelihood of someone doing that sort of thing. Is it that the rapists in the military force are opportunists and they're like, yay, I would have raped anyway, and now I can rape with abandon because this is a lawless area and my commanding officer either won't see or won't care? Or does it somehow compel or trigger something in people who wouldn't normally do something like that to do something like that? I guess that's something for a whole other episode, right, Berto?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, because it's got to be a combination, you know, and a war, a big, huge global war is different because now all of a sudden you still have a Pareto curve of a distribution of people because there's so many people fighting that you're going to have your psychopaths, you're going to have your rapists in there anyways, right? And like they just happen to be at war. And then that's very different from a whole culture where like all you know, because that's what your adults do, so that's what you grow up doing. It's like, oh yeah, we go to other towns. They're not really like us anyways, so we just take what they have and we, of course we rape the women because we want to have more people like us or whatever, right? Like, and if that's your culture, obviously it's not right by our standards, but it's certainly the only thing you're going to know. So,
yeah, so getting back to Midsommar, final word from you, Berto.
I really, really enjoyed it. I still, because I love horror movies, I still preferred Hereditary, maybe because it was a little more horror, but That said, I had a very glorious audio-visual experience. It was thrilling. It was scary. I felt very disoriented. I had to not really look away, but came close to looking away in a few scenes. It was quite intense. I loved it.
Yeah, agreed. Couldn't put it better myself. All right, people, what did you think of Tiger King and Midsommar? Comment below or go to psychologyandstouter.com and fill out the Contact Us page. That's how we can find your comments, most likely. Did you think Tiger King was classism porn? Did you think Carol Baskin did it? Do you think that Joe Exotic deserves to be released from prison? Midsommar, what out of 10 did you give it? Did you like it? If you're a woman and you felt female empowerment from this movie, what was that like? Let us know. And please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.